Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Scott Rick and Olga Kazan. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're broadcasting actually from home. Our office is too cold to broadcast from, so how about that? FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Scott Rick is an associate professor of marketing at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Before joining Michigan, he spent 2 years as a postdoc fellow at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Scott teaches courses on consumer behavior, judgment and decision-making, and marketing management. He has published in premier journals spanning marketing, psychology, economics, and neuroscience. At the University of Michigan, Scott has won awards for both research and teaching. His research has been covered extensively in outlets such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Harvard Business Review, and NPR. He holds a Ph.D. in behavioral decision research from Carnegie Mellon University, where he was a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow. Olga Kazan is a staff writer for The Atlantic who is working on a book about personality change. Actually, I probably need to update that. That might be some old news at this point. Her first book, Weird, The Power of Being an Outsider in an Insider World, came out in 2020. She has also written for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, and other publications. She is a two-time recipient of the International Reporting Project's Journalism Fellowship and winner of the 2017 National Headliner Awards for magazine online writing. And now let's welcome Scott Rick and Olga Kazan.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. This was a fabulous read and certainly taught me a lot about myself and a little about my relationship. So I guess just to dive right in, could you maybe tell us what a tightwad and a spendthrift are and kind of who they are? Like, how are they demographically different and what percentage of the population falls in each bucket?
Of course. First, a quick thank you to you, Olga. I'm a huge fan of yours. This is a big thrill. And fan, my goodness, you do such great work, and it's a big thrill to be part of it. So, yeah, tightwads, these are people who experience a lot of distress and anxiety when thinking about spending money. They end up not buying a lot of the things they think they should, and this can produce a lot of regret for them and for the people who have to live with them. It can be kind of a frustrating experience. Spendthrifts have sort of the opposite problem, where they don't experience enough distress when considering spending money. They end up usually spending more than they think they should, and that can also cause a fair amount of regrets. And so there are people in the middle who we call unconflicted consumers. They experience some pain when thinking about spending money. They more or less spend what they think they should. They're kind of happy. They're, psychologically a little less interesting than the extremes of the tightwads and spendthrifts. No offense to them. So we developed a little questionnaire to measure this. And over the years, we tend to find that about 25% fall into the tightwad area, about 25% into the spendthrift area, and then 50% in that kind of Goldilocks zone of being an unconflicted consumer. There are some small demographic correlates to this. Women are a little more likely than men to be spendthrifts, but it's a very small, fragile relationship. Tightwads tend to be a little older. They tend to be a little more, mathematical in their college majors. But one thing that doesn't differ between them is if you look at their current income is not what's producing tightwad spendthrift differences. Tightwads are not tightwads because they're broke. On paper, they often look quite good, but they just don't feel like they can part with the money.
Wow, yeah, and this really, I don't know, this hammered something home for me because so my husband and I were trying to buy a house, and that's since been put on hold because of interest rates.
Sure.
But it was funny because he's a spendthrift. He would walk into a house and go, "I love it, let's buy it. Like, looks great." And I would hem and haw and go, I don't know, even if we could afford it, I could go, I don't know, like, do we know it's going to go up in value? Like, I want to see all the documents first. I want to like examine the neighborhood comps and all that. And, I would have a lot of anxiety about this choice. And he had no anxiety at all. He would sign off on like a huge mortgage and just sleep like a baby through the night. So that was like, I was like, oh wow, we really are different in this regard. And I was wondering if you could that was like reading your book was the first time I noticed that there is like a term for people like me. Like I knew there was a term for people who spend too much money, but like I was like, oh, I might actually have a problem where I don't spend enough. um,
Right.
so how is being a tightwad different from just being frugal or being poor?
Yeah. So yeah, frugal people are very interesting themselves. They kind of believe in saving money. They believe in kind of reusing items to their, fullest extent. They're not buying a replacement iPhone when it's time to do that. They're just kind of, let's wear it out. And it's just a value to them. They're not kind of overwhelmed with a lot of desire for material things, and they're happy. They look good on paper financially, and they're not kind of torn. They just don't, there aren't a lot of unfulfilled desires for them. The desires are kind of cranked down for the frugal people. Whereas tightwads, there are these kind of struggles. Tightwads like experiences and goods just fine. They just can't bring themselves to spend the money on it. But yeah, in terms of like just being without money to spend, a lot of tightwads did seem to have a time earlier in life where money was tight and or felt tight. And it seems like a lot of them developed like this protective shell to make sure that they didn't go overboard. Um, you know, Anxiety as kind of a protective mechanism to keep you from overspending. But a lot of tightwads, as they go through life, circumstances improve, and then it's time to kind of loosen up. And it's hard to shake these responses you've developed over many years. I quote this character from Love in the Time of Cholera. He grew up poor and then he became a rich industrialist. And someone said, "Oh, well, you're rich." He said, "No, no, I'm not rich. I'm a poor man with money." It's a very different mindset. And so a lot of tightwads seem to have that approach that they feel like they're on the edge, but objectively they look pretty good.
So I was wondering if you could talk about spendthrifts, and I was especially interested in some of the ways that they justify spending. And in particular, the two that stuck out to me were the what the hell effect and shopping momentum. So I was wondering if you could explain those two.
Yeah. No, these are kind of, as a spendthrift, these are kind of in my utility belt. I'm ready to reach for these at any time. So yeah, what the hell effect? It's the idea that once you've overextended on your budget for a given day or week or month, then kind of it's already blown. So what the hell? You might as well just enjoy yourself. You see this a lot with eating, people who are trying to kind of restrict their caloric intake. If you get them kind of, for whatever reason, they eat something high in calories, it's just for the rest of the day. It's like, okay, just bring it on. Let's just make a day of it. What the hell? I'll just start over again tomorrow. So spendthrifts are very likely to get themselves into this situation. In the rare times that we do budget, if we kind of go over a budget, we can really kind of go on a bender. Um, and then shopping momentum is you can see the same brain doing both. The idea there is that an initial purchase, once you open the wallet, especially with the spendthrift, it tends to stay open. So making one kind of initial purchase can really just kind of put you in a different mindset, like going from thinking, kind of like you and your husband, like from thinking and maybe I shouldn't to like, let's do it. We're in implement mode. And so, it's like Target where they have kind of the cheap products right as you walk in. It's meant to break the seal on the cart. And once you kind of break the seal, then it's an avalanche of spending from there.
Wow. This is like so foreign to me. It's not my psychology at all. Um, so, it could at a glance sound like it's really good and fun or, positive to be a tightwad because you end up not overspending and like that's great. But it actually, I mean, it has some negative consequences. Like for example, in my example, we actually never bought a house because of this issue. So I'm wondering what are some strategies for tightwads to actually overcome their penny pinching a little bit?
Yeah. So I think, we normally think of budgeting as a way to restrict spending. But I think for tightwads, budgeting can be a way to loosen up if it's done the right way. And so, what the research suggests is that in the moment, if a tightwad stumbles upon an opportunity for spending money to achieve happiness, they will find reasons why they can't afford it. They can't conjure up a case for spending in the moment. But if they're able to kind of pre-commit to having some fun, to indulgence, with a budget. I have X dollars to spend per week or per month on, optional things, not necessities, but fun optional things. Then it's there. The money's there. And when they encounter the opportunity, they're not looking for the money or coming up with ways. It's already earmarked. So I think that the earmarking and the pre-commitment can be good for a tightwad. Um, yeah, and whatever you can do to kind of take attention away from the money leaving your possession is good. Sometimes it's just kind of going into the right retail spaces. Not that I need this, but when I go into, there's a department store here called Von Maur. It's the Nordstrom of the Midwest. They don't like that name, but you go up to the counter and I bring clothes and I always have to think, okay, what am I doing this weekend? Because I know they're going to ask and they're going to distract me. It's like a magician, like look over here. And by the time you know it, I've got a bag. I don't even remember what happened. They're very skilled at kind of making the payment part invisible.
Hmm.
Uh, and tightwads left to their own devices, it's way too visible.
Hmm.
So, that's why I like, not that I like cruises, but if you're going to go on a cruise, like get the everything covered package. So it's not like you're not experiencing the pain every time you make a transaction. Just, do it once, get it out of the way. And um, yeah, so it's about kind of pushing the vividness of spending out of mind as much as possible.
Hmm. And then conversely, how can spendthrifts rein themselves in a little bit so they're not spending quite so much?
Yeah, it's hard because retailers are not going to help with that. They're looking to help the tightwads loosen up. They're not looking to help the spendthrifts behave themselves. So it really is kind of incumbent on the spendthrifts to, strategize here. But, I think it's a big thing is kind of creating psychological speed bumps, um, putting friction into the process. Can you pay with cash instead of credits, or at least pay with debit instead of credit? Um, can you delete your credit card information from your Amazon account? So like you have to take an extra few seconds to kind of type it in and think, do I really want this? Um, so yeah, adding that friction. Retailers are great at taking away friction. You have to add your own friction. And of course, budgeting is good for a spendthrift. It can get them thinking about, oh, well, if I don't buy this now, I can use that money to buy something else later. That's not a very natural way for them to think. We don't think about opportunity cost, what we're giving up later. Um, so it's hard. I had to train myself to be a tightwad in grad school when I had no money, and I would pay with cash, and I would experience pain at the ATM, and then pain with cash. I was just trying to create all the pain I could just to slow myself down. It's no way to live. It's not fun, but it was a survival tactic. Um,
I see. I feel like when I was in grad school, that took care of itself by the fact that I just had no money to
right.
get out of the ATM.
But I was coming in with a, shopping momentum, a real head of steam, and I had to plan this out.
Another thing I found interesting, and this is the case again for me, is that tightwads and spendthrifts often marry each other, and I was wondering why that is.
Yes. Usually we go out and we marry ourselves. We like ourselves. Democrats marry Democrats, Republicans marry Republicans. But if there's something we don't like about ourselves, it can be really painful to see another person kind of displaying that. And tightwads and spendthrifts, they don't love being tightwads and spendthrifts. And it can really make you kind of self-conscious and put an uncomfortable spotlight on your own issues when you see someone else kind of going through what you go through. And it's like, oh my God, do I do that? It's like, if you're a nail biter and you don't want to be a nail biter and you see someone doing it, it's like, ugh, is that what I look like? And so you can shy away from that. And so I think at first, during like dating, it can be fun and interesting, and just frankly like a good conversation topic when you have like different approaches to money. And it's just a fascinating character study. But all the decisions are kind of low stakes. uh, when you get married, these things that were kind of fun and interesting can be less fun when we're thinking about private school and houses and interest rates and how many kids to try for. And so we call it like it's a fatal attraction pattern, where the thing that kind of draws us in initially can over time be less fun.
I see. I wanted to talk a little bit about like the day to day of navigating a relationship like this. Regardless of whether you're a mixed tightwad spendthrift or if you are just somewhere in the middle, both of you. What are some advantages and disadvantages of having a joint bank account versus just keeping everything separate, or doing some sort of hybrid where you have some money together and some money separately?
Yeah. No, it's very non-obvious, and people do it a lot of different ways, and you can make it work different ways. Personally, I am a fan of having at least a joint account within the couple. I like, and this is based on an experiment we did with newlywed couples and just kind of the theory that's out there. But a joint account, I think, is a good receiver for all incoming money. This is assuming you're in a committed relationship and things are generally going well. If things are shaky, I'm not sure I would have this advice for you, but um, everything coming in goes to the joint automatically. It's all our money. There's no yours and mine. It's ours. And you want that kind of communal relationship where we're not scorekeeping, um, to the extent possible. And so it's good for that. It's good for sparking conversations about learning about each other. What's your goals? Why, what do you want to do in the next couple of years? It gets you on the same page a little bit. Um, and so I like there being a joint account within the couple, but I'm not so sure I would suggest only a joint account. I like having separate accounts on the back end of the joint account. And we each get to funnel some money from the joint account into our separate accounts. And what this does is like we each get to spend some of our money without being kind of closely monitored by the other person, because that's just no fun. And you can get into a lot of unnecessary arguments about little things that seem like they matter, but don't really. And we might have different hobbies or interests, and I'm not going to understand what things cost in your world and vice versa. And so, yeah, I think some combination of joint and separate is usually a good approach.
Hmm. And how transparent should you be with your partner about your spending? Like, should you be um, telling them like whenever you make a big purchase, either for yourself or maybe it's a household purchase that the other person didn't think was truly necessary? Should you, I guess, divulge like exactly how much it costs? Like, I feel like things can get tricky, whether it's like you think about like necessities and wants, but a lot of things kind of fall in the gray zone. And I am not sure, what's your advice on how transparent to be about those things?
Yeah. So I ideally kind of, to the extent possible, kind of household level purchases would be paid for from the joint accounts with some discussion attached to it. I'm thinking of those car commercials where one spouse surprises the other with like a new Lexus, and like this is not good. Um, but yeah, in terms of um, kind of clearly individual spending, um, I favor kind of financial translucency. So not full transparency, but we each kind of get an idea of what the other person is up to. We know how much we're spending per week or month or whatever it is, but we don't need to be privy to the individual details. Those can be kind of available upon request, um, but it's not kind of the default that we just kind of go line by line through what the other person is spending. But you make a great point in that there are a lot of purchases that fall into this gray area. Is this like for you or for us?
Mhm.
Um, and I would err more on the side of discussing those purchases and asking and being open about those. I think that's um, usually the right approach. And some couples have like, oh, if there's a spending threshold, if it's above X dollars, then that triggers a discussion. Um, but yes, I would say in those ambiguous moments, it's better to err on the side of talking it out. But for something
Mhm.
that's clearly, it's me, I'm getting a latte at my job, it's my mental health latte, I need this. It's not really doing anything to our, you know, overall picture, then I don't think we need to get into it together.
Yeah. Do you recommend prenups? I know this can be controversial because, like, in some ways, you're kind of saying that, like, well, if things really go sideways, we both have an out. At the same time, it can really protect people, especially if you're totally divergent about money and it never really comes together.
There's a fascinating New Yorker article on this like a year or so ago. Some new interesting use cases for prenups. And so that was a bit eye-opening. And I know I have friends who are like divorce lawyers, and they've seen how awful it can get without kind of a plan. Um, so I understand the economic and legal argument for it. And um, I would never kind of judge a couple for choosing to do this. It's perfectly reasonable. But from a happiness perspective, from a psychological perspective, if things are generally going well, I would have a lot of concerns. And one is that someone has to bring this up, and they have to reveal some pretty significant doubts about whether this is going to last. And I think it is hard to shake that off for a lot of couples to forget that you had these profound doubts about how this is going to turn out. I think prenups would be fine if it was mandatory, if you just had to specify in writing, this is what would happen. And it's just like, oh, it's something we have to do. And, not this is ever going to happen, but we have to. But the fact that somebody has to bring it up, and I think is really bad. Maybe you can frame it as, oh, my family insists. It's not me. It's like they're paying for the wedding, so we got to do something. I get that. Um, Also, from a psychological perspective, it is a backup plan. It is, this is what will happen if things don't pan out. And we know from a good amount of research that when people have backup plans, they tend to strive a little more casually towards the focal plan. And so I know if we are kind of struggling and things are bad, do we go to couples counseling, or do I just kind of reassure myself, well, there's a plan here in place if this falls apart. So, it's a lot of what I propose is kind of risky. Maybe that's like the spendthrift in me. Like, I'm proposing kind of going all in a way on the relationship. And yeah, so if things are rocky, if you have true reasons for doubt, then maybe some of these more risk averse approaches make sense.
Hmm. I was wondering where our beliefs about money come from. Like, I have met, I mean, just so many people, and you would think that journalists are all thrifty people because we don't make a lot. But I've met people who would go to a really expensive, journalism grad school and then have a ton of debt, and it just doesn't bother them at all. Like it is, just something they live with, and they're like, oh, eventually I'll either pay it off or it'll go away or I'll die. I don't know. For me, like that would be as a tightwad, very troubling. Like that would be something I think about like every day. And I was wondering where those beliefs or like kind of impulses come from, because like how can two people have such, look at the same quantity of money and some people see it as no big deal and some people see it as like a disaster.
Yes. Um, yeah, like they might look very similar if you pulled up their bank accounts and um their family history. But yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is that spendthrifts are more present oriented. Um, we are less caught up in thoughts about the future. It's interesting. Spendthrifts actually seem to have a better understanding of how enjoyment with products will decline over time, and it does. Like you get like a new fun thing, it's fun for a little while, and then I'll get over it. Spendthrifts actually seem to understand that better than tightwads. They just don't care so much about the later part because we live in the present for better or worse. It has its ups and downs. So there's that. I do think tightwads are more prone to rumination and those kinds of thoughts and kind of getting caught up in that, um, which can be a good thing. It's good for like not, um, you know, if I wanted to bet on someone to always file their taxes on time, I'm going with the tightwad. Like they're gonna kind of get that kind of thing right, and that's important. Um, but yeah, I think it is kind of just there are some more basic psychological tendencies of present-mindedness and impulsivity versus kind of distress, rumination, um, and then you kind of put money on top of those kind of existing tendencies. And I think that's a lot of where it comes from.
And how similar do kids end up being to their parents when it comes to financial habits? And especially, in these mixed tightwad spendthrift marriages, do you just end up with like a perfect moderate child?
It's possible. I would want to know who the kid is spending more time with.
Okay.
Yes, that is usually going to be who has more influence. Um, yeah, this was a real eye opener for me. Um, now I have kind of three kids all in elementary school, and you know, there are kind of foibles that my wife will kind of put up with when it was just me and her. But when she sees me kind of passing it on to the kids, then that can be really irritating. That can trigger a family meeting. And so yeah, the kids are often getting very mixed messages from the parents. Um, I know I've told my kids to I'll be like, yeah, turn off the screens. Like, hold on, I gotta like something on Twitter. Like, they'll see these disconnects between what the parents say and what they do. And we bring kids and parents into the lab to kind of talk through kind of hypothetical spending decisions. And you see the extreme parents try to kind of moderate the kid when they see the kid copying them. Like you'll see a tightwad parent saying, you can loosen up a little. I don't want to make another one of me. And same with the spendthrift. Like, hold on, buddy. Like there might be some other use for that money. Just chill out. So you see the parents trying to moderate the kids. That's the message they're getting. But what we tend to find is kind of over time, usually the kids come home. Now you might think in adolescence when the kid is kind of, leaving the house, they're probably not going to look too much like the parents, because they can't mimic what the parents were doing. You can't get into like an unaffordable mortgage at age 18, usually. It takes a while. But when later on, when you confront these things, they tend to revert to what they saw in the household. So, you know, it's kind of who did they spend the most money with or most time with? And then if it's a mismatched couple, the question becomes, well, who's more likely to win in
Hmm.
those? I don't know if you have a tendency in your marriage, like does one person tend to kind of have more say over the joint decisions? I have a prediction, but I'm curious.
Well, I feel like I do tend to have more say, but only because like the tightwad kind of always wins, right? Because like if it requires both people to like sign on the dotted line like a mortgage would, like I'm not signing. So it's sort of yeah, but if my husband was like just like if I was like go buy us a house, then like that would be done in like half an hour.
Yes, yes, yeah. There are some things where you both kind of have to turn your key, and
Yeah.
yes. Um, well, I think what we tend to find, and maybe this will come around for you too, is that the spendthrifts usually win.
Huh.
The tightwads win all kinds of battles. Like, no, it's not time for a house yet. Interest rates. Eventually, you will have a moment where you are convinced, and that is all the spendthrift needs is just this one time where the tightwad says, "Okay, fine, let's do it." And so the tightwad can say, "No, no, no, all you want." That's just the beginning of a conversation. That's just delaying the inevitable. Um, so it's yeah, the spendthrift just needs to be lucky once. They just need their moment. But the tightwad needs to be like stalwarts always. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and then usually, so once the money's spent, it's very hard to unspend it. Yes, there are things that can be returned, but if it's like a vacation or like a complicated financial contract, once that's signed, it's over. And so the mixed couples, they look more like two spendthrift couples than two tightwad couples when it comes to what they spend,
Hmm.
because eventually the spendthrift will wear you down. And
Right. Okay, okay. If you are a spendthrift, let's say you're both spendthrifts, is there a way to, and you know, you maybe don't want that for your kids. Is there a way to encourage them to stick to a budget, maybe even better than you can?
yeah, no, I mean, there are all kinds of renewal opportunities here. You know, so people can change. You can do it as a family. You can even be honest with your kids. Like I overspend, and I would like to stop, and maybe together we can help each other. And budgeting can be a family activity. Uh, you know, in the meantime, if you're not fully ready to kind of go all in on changing yourself, you can at least be less of a spendthrift in front of them.
Hmm.
They don't need to see every single thing you do. They don't know, they don't need to know the amount I bid on certain items on eBay after they go to bed. Um, they don't need to look at my statements line by line. And, if they're with me at Target and I do spend a lot of money, I can at least make them understand that this is not some easy thing for me, that there is a consequence to this, and that I can kind of perform a little bit of tightwadism. And maybe I can even pay with cash if possible. Um, because kids don't understand credit cards and how this is resolved later. It just seems like free money. So, um, articulating some tightwad like thinking in front of them to help them understand like there are consequences. I am still going to do some spendy stuff, but I want you to understand that this is not obvious for me, and I realize that it means we won't get to do something else later. And so, um, yeah, just be aware that they are just so much more likely to sponge up what they see you do. And um, if you can kind of, uh, moderate that at all in front of them, or at least perform the psychology of a tightwad, um, I do think that can help.
I was wondering if you could talk about, and I think I have this right, but correct me if I got it wrong. Um, there's a theory in your book that when it comes to a material purchase,
Mm.
you should let the tightwad win. And if it comes to an experiential purchase, you should let the spendthrift win. Can you elaborate on how that would work and why that is?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that they kind of disagree about what to spend. And this advice is based on kind of the research on kind of consumption and happiness that the happiness that comes with a experience is more lasting. There are memories, there are stories. Um, Sometimes it could be even kind of less expensive than like a fancy material purchase. So um, I don't think it should be one or the other, always tightwads winning or always spendthrifts winning. I think this is a way to kind of find common ground, maximize happiness per dollar spent. Um, and so you want to err a little more on the side of reining in the material purchases and err a little more on the side of going for it for experiences. Now, as you said earlier, there's ambiguity in things. What is a motorcycle? Is it a thing or is it an experience? I don't know. But um, at least on things that are kind of clear, I think that is a good mechanism to resolve some of these disagreements.
So if you're thinking about a fun vacation, maybe just go ahead and do it, even if you're a tightwad. But if it's a material, if it's a new, kitchen doodad or something, then maybe, let the tightwad win if you have three more like it.
Yes. Or like, we could use a nicer dishwasher, but it still works. So maybe we stick with it and you let the tightwad win and say, no, no, we're not ready to replace this for another X years. But then you go for it on the experiences. It's just it's something I've learned through experience and research, just like the importance of like vacations and family vacations, just the stories and you just learn about each other. We don't always get to learn about each other so much day to day. Even if like, oh, I've been married for 30 years. I know a lot of what you're talking about is like who's going to let in the refrigerator repair person or who's
Hmm.
going to go unclog the toilet, like a lot of like real nuts and bolts stuff. And so you need this separation from the day-to-day grind. That could be through conversations, that can be through experiences too.
I was wondering, I mean, we talked about how often people do end up in these mixed marriages. But I'm wondering how important someone's financial habits should be when you're considering marriage. Like, I mean, the fact that people end up in these marriages suggests that people are like, oh, I can change him or whatever. But should you not think that? And should you kind of try to go find another tightwad to spend your life with?
Yeah, you can change them a little, but not a lot. And if there is something that drives you mad during the courtship, I would just say, caution you, it's not going to get better. It is going to get worse, like 100%, because the decisions will just get more consequential. So, I think it should rarely be a deal breaker. And I do think people should be aware that even if you are mismatched, there are things you can do, like with your account structures, with conversations to make it a very happy relationship. I'm married to a tightwad. It's great. It can be done, but it has to be done the right way. So usually not a deal breaker. By all means, explore. Um, but I would just say if it is really something you're noticing and it's really irritating early on, just be aware that can I live with this? Because it will get worse. Sorry, but
That's
yeah,
optimistic. Don't give any
yes,
wedding toasts to that effect.
I know.
Um, I would, a lot of this is going to be about negotiation and the inevitable kind of kitchen table sort of, well, I really think we should take the kids to Disney World. Well, Disney World is so expensive. Well, they're going to remember it forever. Uh, how do you negotiate some of these things, especially when there's a standoff. Because I mean, there's one thing of like, one person will wear the other person down or like letting someone win. But is there like a healthier way to come to a resolution about what you're going to do when you have these fundamentally opposite ways of thinking about money?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, part of it is like, to the extent that you can, the material versus experiential kind of tiebreakers or heuristic. Um, yeah, it's, I think being aware of kind of um, the relevant research and some of that's in the book and about kind of the importance of really good family vacations that we all talk about forever. And like, just, you know, if I'm a spendthrift, I would marshal that research and say, look, this does matter. This is really important. We haven't had a time to, um, good times to anticipate in a while and learn about each other via travel and experience. Um, but uh, financial planners play a role. Their financial therapists can play a role. That's kind of a booming area. I do think it can be good to get kind of an outside perspective if you are truly at an impasse. It doesn't need to be kind of couples therapy if people are uncomfortable with that, but just kind of financial counseling is useful. The study I want to do is like where, let's say we're married, we disagree, we write it up, our disagreement, we have kind of 200 people vote on it. And then I think that could really help to break the impasse. Just to say, hey, 90% of people agree with this view. Let's update our perspectives here. So I am a big fan of getting an outside view if you have the time and money to afford that. But absent that, Twitter poll, not the worst thing in the world. Um, you know,
No, I wish I could do a randomized controlled trial every time I have a fight with my husband.
yeah,
People do fight about money a lot. Yeah, famously, like one of the things that couples fight about. And I'm wondering why money is can be so painful. Because you think of it as this very cold, kind of clinical thing. And I'm wondering why it does kind of cut so deep whenever someone says you're spending so much or you're being irrational about not buying this thing we really need. It almost like conjures more emotions than what is actually being said. And I'm wondering if you have a theory for why that is.
yeah. Well, there are kind of goes back to the uncomfortable spotlights. Um, like you're spending too much, you're eating too much. Like these are not fun things to hear. Um, and so it's, there can be kind of, it's not just kind of neutral feedback that you're getting sometimes. It's kind of, it's kind of pointed. Um, sometimes there's that. And sometimes you hear that when people are fighting about money, it's just something much more fundamental, like we don't communicate well, or there's a power imbalance, or um, I'm still mad about the way you kind of talk to that other person at the party, and the money's just you know, it's just a symptom. It's not really the cause. And I do think that that is true sometimes, but I also think that money sometimes is the cause, that it is the fundamental thing that's wrong. And there are ways that that can be worked around. And some of that is like, let's change the account structure. Let's change what we know about what the other person is doing. Let's change kind of the default for, the information that's being shared. And so, if you change the money, you can change the psychology, the way the money kind of moves in the house. I think the psychology can follow from that. So, um, yeah, it's a very charged thing, but there are some kind of technical fixes that you can adopt to, take the sting out a little. Even if it's not earning more money, it's just kind of changing how the money operates.
I was wondering if these tendencies, tightwad and spendthrift tendencies, tend to change over the life course. I guess I'm thinking back to like there was a period of time in high school when I just really loved shopping for clothes, going to the mall and shopping. And now you have to like drag me to bananarepublic.com to buy one new thing. And I'm wondering, I mean, maybe that's some of that is just that I have to buy my own groceries now, but is there something that changes as you get older where you tend toward one or the other at various points?
Yeah, that's really tight if you have to be dragged to the website. That's an image. Um, no, we all have our moments, our times in life, and certainly like, having kids and that forces you to like do all this new spending. It's mandatory. Being in a relationship, like you have to get the gifts. Um, are we doing Valentine's this year? Yes, we're doing Valentine's this year, every year. Don't ask. It's being done. So there's just a lot of mandatory spending that can just come with life. And so, I do think you can change. I think a tightwad, if they were forced to do like a bunch of household spending all the time, it could kind of loosen you up to it a little. It's kind of like, a pitcher kind of warming up before the game. Like you can relax that tendency to stop. Um, but I will say we don't see dramatic swings over time.
Hmm.
There are moments, there are pockets, there's a little movement. And the best couples, by the way, are usually the couples where there is some convergence over time. The couples that don't converge, they either keep fighting or they stop being a couple. So
Hmm.
you have to find some path to moderation.
Hmm. I was wondering if you have any thoughts for tools for tracking spending or budgeting.
Hmm.
I feel like I occasionally get really into one of these and then it like I stop logging whatever thing I'm supposed to be logging. And now I'm even wondering if I should be logging things because I already don't spend any money.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what your advice is for those tech tools.
Yeah. Well, maybe you should be logging things that maybe I should have bought that. Uh,
Yeah,
the other side.
right.
Um, my wife used to come home and tell me, like, she would go shopping and then come home and tell me about the things she wished she would have bought. Like, the thing. Um, so yeah, no, there are some amazing apps out there. I know that people have really benefited from that. I get it. I'm all for it. Personally, I think one of the best ways to do it is an Excel sheet, a Google spreadsheet. And
Mhm.
you have to enter it in yourself. That is what if you want to really monitor something, you have to, write it down or enter it. And it's not just like, oh, I have the full transaction record available to me. Like available is one thing, but you creating the record is another thing. So when I was in my tightwad era and forcing myself to feel pain, I would always, if I couldn't pay with cash, I would get a receipt and I would be the dork in the group to say, yes, I'd like the receipt for my Diet Coke. And I would take that to my Excel file and enter in, the dates and where I got it and the amount. And that really forced me to, um, you know, have a good understanding, a real-time understanding of where everything was.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah, just like the old-fashioned stuff does work. Notebooks, Excel files, um, and again, yeah, just the physical act of logging this stuff. It can work.
Hmm. Earlier, you mentioned financial advisors, and I was wondering if you could give a little bit more directive on or financial therapists. At various points I have tried to engage a financial advisor to like help me with weirdly my tightwad problem, but I've never been able to find someone who doesn't charge like a huge monthly fee or who won't weirdly one of them tried to sell me life insurance. I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of sketchy people out there and I'm wondering how people can avoid the sketchy ones and find the good ones.
Yeah. Well, there are some people who do truly need like weekly or monthly check-ins.
Mhm.
Uh, and I have heard stories and I'm convinced by that. I think a lot of us could just benefit from an occasional check-in with someone at like an institution we've heard of, and getting us another view on, can we afford to buy a house right now? Um, are we saving in a reasonable way? Uh, there are things that, smart people who aren't total experts, they can just be lost looking at the numbers themselves. So it's a good outside perspective checking in on occasion. And it doesn't need to cost a lot. Often they will hope to sell you something else, and the initial meeting might be, quite affordable, let's say. But you can get a really good, like a half hour with like an expert can be amazingly helpful, I think, just to get a lay of the land. I also personally like the Am I Rich calculator on the New York Times website, just for kind of resetting, um, kind of how you see yourself and what I can afford. And it compares like, oh, what do you think is rich? Where do you live? What do you make? Hey, you're rich. And you might think, oh my gosh, I was just scraping by. Now, that doesn't take into account expenses, of course. It takes into account income and where you live. But there are these simple things you can do to get a different perspective. And I do think that's quite useful.
And when you say institutions you've heard of, do you mean a bank or?
I do. Or just, there are lots of, reputable firms that do this kind of thing. Um, I don't want to be talk ill of anyone in particular, but I'm just saying, if it's been around, it's got a nice marble building and good structure. That's usually where I'd want to hear advice.
I see, I see. Um, I was wondering how you got interested in this topic. Whether you, was this like a personal thing for you, or did you write a PhD dissertation and it kind of all went from there?
No, it's very, very me search from the start. I was very much raised by spendthrifts. Uh, my lived in Houston, grew up in Houston. My grandparents got bored of us, moved to Vegas. They were kind of like show people. That was sad, but we got to visit them. So a lot of my childhood was in like a casino over the summers. I would hang out there and just wander around. They would go play bingo or whatever. I just kind of wander around, and I looked older than I was, which was fun then, not now. But no, so I was always fascinated by these questionable spending decisions, like this spending to achieve happiness. Like that's what Vegas is. That's what everyone's doing. They're trying to buy happiness. And it's just a daily struggle for happiness via money. And that was fascinating to me, especially when I realized like a lot of my buddies back in Houston, their families worked very differently. And I started noticing a lot of tightwads in my midst. And so I got fascinated by this difference. Like I did not have this reaction that they had, that you're kind of articulating here. So I became interested in those differences. And I certainly became interested in them when I married a tightwad. And I wondered, do other people do this? Does it work? Can it work? How do they navigate this? And now with kids, like how do we spread it to the kids? So it's very me search. I always tell people, if you ever see me researching divorce, something has gone askew. But yes, it's very inspired by these things I wrestle with myself.
Wow, that's such a fun story.
Thanks.
Scott, I hope you don't ever have to be researching divorce.
Yeah, right.
Let's stay optimistic.
Exactly.
Thanks for a great conversation, Olga. Really appreciate you're always so prepared when you come and you do such a great dive into our featured guests' work. So thank you so much for that preparation. I know Scott is well served by it. Thank you for that. I want to remind everyone that you can come to After Hours. This book, when I picked up this book, I'm a tightwad, true. When I was reading it, I'm like, oh, there were points, Olga, I feel your pain. There are points where you're like, oh, yes, that's me. Yes, that's me. I want to definitely, when we're in After Hours, I want to talk a little bit about the psychological profile of some of these folks. Like, how did you talk a little bit about the family of origin piece, talk a little bit about some of that and how you became this person. You weren't just kind of hatched this way. How did it all happen? So can't wait to talk about some of that. Buy a copy of this book. It's a quick read. It's a great read, jam-packed with plenty of stuff. I just loved it. I've been recommending it to everyone. come hang out, come join us at After Hours. We've been putting the links in chat about how to come to After Hours, buy a copy. You'll get the link in the email receipt from the book stall to join After Hours. We spend an hour in After Hours. You can ask Scott all of your closely held questions. We're at 7:56. So Scott, there's two questions that were submitted during the event that I'd like to see if we can hop to. The first one, and this is kind of interesting because I think I get asked this when I've been talking about the book. Can you be a tightwad in one shopping domain, but a spendthrift in another? In other words, like, for example, Olga, for example, might be like mortgages are like 1 billion% tightwad, but gee, when it comes to her lipstick, it's Chanel or nothing, you know? So wondering, what are your thoughts? Yeah, that's not a true statement about Olga, just to be clear. Go ahead, Scott. What do you have some things like that?
It can happen. Part of it is because there are things in life that are mandatory. So some things are optional and I struggle with them. I'm pretending to be a tightwad right now. So yes, I say no to a lot of things for me, but gift giving, I have to buy the kids something and it can, some tightwads do enjoy that and they kind of become unleashed and it's fun for them. And so if there are things that they can convince themselves are for others, then that can help loosen them up for sure. We do find that. Yes.
Now, do you see that where it can be difficult for a tightwad to spend on self? But I mean, I feel I'm a little bit that way. I don't have too much of a problem spending on the people very close to me. In fact, I can be almost borderline extravagant with them.
Yeah.
For myself, I'm like, oh, this old t-shirt's just fine for the next 27 years. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, really.
Yeah. No, and they're altruistic too. They're usually good donors. They might not donate as much as they think they should, but they're donating. Whereas as spendthrifts, maybe there's less of a boundary between kind of you and me. It's like I want all of us to have fun, and
That's right.
this round's on me, like that's us. And but yes,
Well,
there are
great.
some. What's that?
Sorry, go ahead. No, please
Yeah,
go ahead.
there are some domains where we do see tightwads loosen up a bit. Yes.
And then I want to go to a question from Maureen. She was saying about what about the personal responsibility for spendthrifts? For example, when dishonesty and debt enter into the picture, it seems to be more than just about habits, wants, or preferences.
Yeah. If there is kind of dishonestly accumulated debt, that's a bad thing. There are some minor moments of dishonesty that I don't care about, like if I don't report the latte that I bought at work, we don't need to be too strict about what's honest or not. But yes, there are some real problems out there. And if you sense that's going on, then some of these rules go out the window. We do have to kind of be proactive in sharing what we're up to. My rules are more for couples where things are okay and they could be better. But if there's a crisis blooming, yes, we need everything on the table for sure.
I hear that. I appreciate that. All right, so we're just right at almost 8 o'clock, so we're going to close out here. Olga, it was a pleasure to see you again. Thank you so much for your service to FAN and its community. Really appreciate that. Hope to welcome folks tomorrow night. We're doing our program on LGBTQ youth. Come hang out, come join that as well. It's going to be great content for that program. Scott, we're going to give you a 5-minute break in between now and after hours. So folks, if you're coming to after hours, bring your questions. Scott's research is deep and there's tons and tons and tons of little rabbit holes we can explore in after hours. So thanks for joining us and we'll see everyone hopefully again soon. Thank you so much.